This concept quickly. If anyone in this room is looking for an instructor, a drill instructor, a sergeant or lieutenant to get you through this academy, get up and get out now. It's not going to happen. I'm not here to get you through the academy. That's not my function. It's not my job. My job is to place obstacles in front of you. It's your job to develop a process and how to get through those obstacles and move forward. My job is to make things uncomfortable. Discomfort promotes change, promotes better habits. From there, it's up to you whether you develop the self-discipline to sustain those habits moving forward. Make sense?
Yes, sir.
If you're looking from the outside, for outside factors to get you through this academy, do not come back on the 8th. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon and welcome to Fido Talk with Dave Thompson. Today we have a special guest. This is Sam Juster's second go-around with us, and let's welcome Sam. Hi, Sam.
Hi, Dave. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for coming on again. Just a quick background on Sam again. He's a 14-year combat veteran, a board-certified attorney, all-around good guy, and we're going to discuss a bunch of stuff today, and from a different point of view as far as from going from a leadership role to more of an operational team member role. So without further ado, let's hit it. What do you think?
I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So let's get into going from a command to an operational team member. How long did you hold command for?
I was in command for 23 months.
Okay. And now that you found yourself on the operational side of things, has your point of view, your perspective changed at all?
It has. So since the last time we spoke, I left command. When we spoke last on the podcast, I had just gotten married, and now I have a son. So trying to figure out where perspective changed in terms of from position or from becoming a dad or from moving. It's hard to say where what comes from, but quite a bit of perspective has changed since the last time I was on.
Okay, so what for you was, if there was any, what would you say would be the biggest adjustment going from making the big decisions to, taking a role as to like following the big decisions?
It's almost comparable to coming home from a deployment in that you're going from 100 miles per hour all the time to kind of taking a load off and recognizing some of the decisions aren't your decisions. And that's fine, and that there's more than one right way to do something. And I remember coming out of command. It's not a surprise as commander, you're in for about 2 years, and you know that, and you start looking for a new job when that's coming to a close. You don't stay a commander forever. So I knew that it was coming to an end. And one of my mentors was saying, find a place where you can take a knee for a minute, take a load off, rest. I remember thinking, no, man, like, I got all this momentum. I want to keep this going. Like, I want to keep driving on. And boy, was he right. Like, he was 100% correct. And that didn't really hit home until I had taken a knee for about a month and kind of recognized how in that command role, how unsustainable that is. It's important. You got to do it, but you can't do it for 3 years, 4 years. I don't know how folks do that are in that role. So I'm thinking if you're in a corporate world, a CEO is not a CEO for 2 years. They're
Right.
a CEO indefinitely.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know how they do that. I've enjoyed taking a knee for a little bit, and now I'm ready to get back into those leadership roles again. But you need that rest. You need that period of self-reflection.
At any time as you were out of, or while you're out of that command role, do you find yourself Monday morning quarterbacking other people's decisions and, maybe second guessing the way someone else's approach is?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because I'm a human being. So,
Right.
so absolutely. And, so I was in command of a company within a battalion, and one of the other companies within the battalion, a sister company, the other commander is a close friend of mine. And he and I are both no longer in command, and we're both team members in the same organization. So to think that the two of us don't Monday morning quarterback is not, yeah, of course we do. But the key is to constantly reflect and say, okay, well, what would I have done in the actual moment? Well, I don't know, because I'm not in the moment.
Right.
A few days later, nothing actually matters about what decision I'm making, because it's not a real decision. It's a hypothetical. And so you got to cut those leaders some slack when you're not in that role, and just be supportive.
So as a leader in your leadership roles, was one lesson you may have taken away is to maybe have some empathy,
Sure.
especially
Sure.
if we don't have all the available information that someone else may have made a decision on.
Absolutely. And I think you can see that with when you're in the leadership role, the folks that are within your organization, at least in my experience, were very empathetic with me as well. So knowing like, all right, got a decision to make, making the best decision you can. Maybe there's a better way to do it. Maybe there's not. Maybe there's some other lateral way of approaching this, but they're recognizing that that's my responsibility, and they're supportive of it. And maybe they were Monday morning quarterbacking me behind my back, and that's totally fine and natural too. But with me, they were supportive, and we're gonna move forward. So I try to do the same with the folks that I work for now.
Right. I know for me, I can 100% say that there were times, especially, coming from like a kind of a higher tempo mission in the military, and then back to a law enforcement boots on the ground role, team member, that I definitely didn't have that empathy, that kind of open-mindedness,
Sure.
more small ball thinking than big picture thinking.
It all depends on what you're looking at. There are certain aspects of the organization that I'm currently in, or one of the organizations I'm currently in, that I'm a little less empathetic. There's certain fundamentals that when you violate those, my empathy is lacking. It's more the big things where someone's really doing their best, and like I said, they're getting that 90% solution. And that's really all you can hope for. On the other side of things, where someone's messing up something like soldier pay, you won't find a lot of empathy from me.
No. Okay. That's fair. There are certain lines that, people need to be held accountable for, and that's what accountability is all about, right? So when we talk about the different principles and the different approaches and ways to do things, as well as I do, the 11 principles of Army leadership are tested in time, and they're born out of history, all the lessons learned in history.
Sure.
As we were just talking a little while ago, the U.S. military, the richest, mightiest military in the history of the world, invests in these principles, and that should say something, because
Right.
the principles can be applied. They can be applied, in my opinion, universally. So it's not like the infantry has a different set of 11 principles than the admin and supply section.
I think that that's something people forget about the Army, is that it isn't just the infantry, right? So when you think of the Army, you do think of the infantrymen, and I would argue that everything we do is a shaping operation for the infantrymen, or at least it should be. But the Army is a lot bigger than that, a lot bigger than that.
Correct.
A massive rolling Army. And like you said, those leadership principles are applying to your cooks and your infantrymen, to your seamstresses and your infantrymen and your tankers, and the list goes on and on and on.
Right. What, if any, out of the 11 do you hang your hat or rely on? If there's any you rely on more than the others, what would they be?
I think one thing is that they're situational. Which one I would say is the most important is going to depend on situations. So most of my command time was during the beginning of the pandemic, when it was very much in the beginning, that March timeframe of 2020, where it was a crisis for sure. I think during a crisis, in my opinion, the most important thing is keeping your people informed, because your folks, even if they're responding to a crisis, they're also experiencing that same crisis, and they don't know what's going on, just like you don't know what's going on. And like that transparency of maintaining that open dialogue, if it's possible, or if it's not possible, at least here are the knowns, here are the unknowns, and keeping everybody on the same page. That was how I tried to lead during crisis, and I found that to be pretty effective. Not during crisis, that principle is still very important, but I don't think that it is the most important, or one that I really focus on. Maybe even during crisis, it's not the most important, but it's one that I had to keep reminding myself, make sure everybody else has the information that you have.
Right.
Otherwise, I think the principles lead by example or set an example. I think that's the tried and true most important principle within leadership, is that if you want people to do something or be something, if you're not modeling that for them, then it's not really a fair expectation.
Right. So we talked about that. So let me hit on the communication. So the 3 parts of communication, right? Communicate your intent, make sure that it is accepted, and then get some sort of feedback to ensure that that message has gotten imparted effectively, and to finish that loop and then move on. That communication is incredibly important, and we'll hit on why that is in a little bit. And as far as setting the example, we talked about earlier today, Hal Moore's principle of leading yourself daily.
Right.
And in my opinion, that's what it all starts with. It starts with that. If you aren't taking care of yourself, filling your own cup first, right, so that you can give your subordinates, your team, your organization 100% of you, that in itself will take care of the example.
Yeah.
That in my opinion, I couldn't agree more as far as setting the example and then, taking responsibility, because if everyone takes responsibility for everything, you can better sit down with open minds and a little more clarity when it comes to fixing situations. If you're transparent with your responsibility, and then coming up with a plan to move forward and mitigate any mistakes and lessons moving forward.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
It does.
And then when we talk about, communicating, when we communicate, it's, for me, optimally, I would want to communicate my intent, so the what, and then ensure that the why is communicated effectively as well. After that, the thing we have left is the how. If I'm confident that we have our tactics, techniques, procedures, policies, rules, left and right limits for our soldiers, workers, officers, whatever industry we're in, if I'm confident that we have a pretty good left and right limits on the people in our charge, the how is up to them.
Absolutely. To me, the why is the most important, because even the what can get frustrated or proved impossible, and that why can still be achieved. Whatever that we're doing this for something else, and whatever that this is, maybe you can't do that at some point, but if you understand why you were doing it in the first place, you can achieve a second best option, or something along those lines without further communication, because sometimes that's not possible either. So kind of understanding the purpose of everything, putting that context there so that you can actually achieve the long-term goals. And then, like you said, the how, to me, if you're focusing on the how, you've probably misstated the why. If you're in the weeds on how to do something, either your organization doesn't have the procedures down flat, which is possible too, or more likely you've misstated the why. The reason that you have to do something a specific way. Well, why? Right there. So whatever that why is wasn't stated in the first place, and that's why you're now focusing on the how.
Right. So that kind of rolls back to Einstein's, if you can't communicate it simply enough, you don't know it well enough.
Fair enough. I like that.
I think in my experience, there is a fair amount of insecurity in like higher echelons of management, supervision, leadership, which is kind of, I'll use that loosely in this example, where we can stand up, do the pointing and say, do this because I fucking said so.
Right.
Well, I'm at a point right now, as soon as somebody says that to me, my initial reaction is, well, then you don't know either.
Right.
And I think that for people, or certainly soldiers, and I guess, it could be universal, that most people are a little more intelligent than you want to give them credit for. And when they ask a question, it comes back to, yeah, I'm going to take responsibility. I didn't, make that as clear as possible. Or maybe I do need to review what we're doing and look into it a little more so I can communicate a little more effectively.
Right.
And I think that that's a hit to people's ego, because for the most part, this, we can bang our chests. There's nothing wrong with, I'm not saying like, masculinity and all that. I'm not getting into that. But what I am saying is that there's nothing wrong with being wrong. And there's nothing wrong at all with, I don't know right now. Like there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
And I think that kind of gets twisted these days. Everyone has to have the answer, your way right away. Right. And I think that gets a little twisted when it comes to communication.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that there's a time and a place for a task without purpose. No, I said that incorrectly. There is not a time and a place for a task without purpose. There is a time and a place for tasking somebody without providing the purpose. Usually it's time constraints or crisis. But if you want to be in a position as a leader to be able to provide a task via knife hand without any context, that has to be based on some sort of mutual trust and respect. That if I'm saying, go do this thing, and expect somebody to go do that without questioning it, that's got to be built on something. Otherwise, they're not going to.
Right.
Or they're going to ask why. And if you're in a crisis, you don't have time for that shit. So.
Right. Absolutely. 100%. And we can get down to that as far as react versus respond.
Right.
I know I've talked about this on different episodes, and there is a time and a place for reaction.
There is.
And that trust, I feel, is born of the training, the repetitions, and affording your team, your division, organization, affording them the resources and time to develop that, and I'm using air quotes here, that muscle memory in order to make that reaction effective.
We were talking earlier this morning about jiu-jitsu, and you're talking through some of the moves and thinking 3-4 moves ahead, and that you get into, that's a response, but something else would be the muscle memory. That'd be your reaction, right? And a lot of those reactions are based on trained responses. And I was saying, when you're talking about the human being and your hands and your arms and where things are and what you're doing with your body, it's a lot harder to kind of articulate it talking and not showing it. But something like I use the example of the multiplication table. If I say, what's 4 times 4? It's 16. That's a reaction. That's something that's ingrained in your understanding of it. But the response is, you also know that 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4 is 16. Like, you can work through it the slow way as well, but you've just done it so many times, you don't have to work through it the slow way anymore. It's just something that you now know. So that's now your reaction. And then if you need to do 4 times 16, then you're going back to your responses.
Right. And there certainly is a time and a place for reactions, for sure. As far as the jiu-jitsu example, I promise you, I am always 1 or 2 steps behind. That's the level I'm at, for sure, 100%.
Right.
I think that, and as far as how it relates to leadership, is I feel that a lot of times, not all the time, there is more time than we'd like to give it credit for to actually maybe take a step back and try to get a broader picture. Try to maybe get or gather a little more information, or as much information as we possibly can within whatever timeline or right and left limits that we have. And then kind of make a more cerebral, rational response.
Sure.
And we all have the same amount of time in a day. If the way things shake out and we prioritize the time, or give ourselves enough time to make a response, I think that lends itself to trust. It lends itself to a calmer approach. It lends itself to the subordinates being able to see that and know that you're not going to rush to judgment if not needed.
Sure.
But there's a balance, right, on some of the reactionary stuff. So, like you said, knife hand, go get this done. At this time, I don't give a fuck. We got to get A, B, and C done.
Right.
That doesn't mean, though, after that task, objective, or whatever is complete, that we can't circle back and bring people in and say, hey, let's do a quick debrief, a quick hot wash. And I know, things were a little harsh and rushed and so forth. This is why. This is what I was given. This is why we had to. So we're still, extracting a lesson, because leaders, like, training doesn't stop at the end of the classroom day, or
right.
the end of the course, or the end of the academy, or anything like that. It's a never-ending evolution of training. So you can still extract some very valuable lessons from the reaction as well. But I think the preferred, and correct me if I'm wrong, or whatever your perspective is, in my opinion, I think the preferred way to go is to try to have a response versus a reaction.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I think that's one of the principles is a timely response. And timely sounds like it means right away, but timely also means not rushed. As much as it means not delayed, it also means not rushed.
Correct. And then, that lends to our decision making. I'll give you an example. There was a situation that happened, and there were 3 people who responded, and at the end of the day, the situation was handled. And I know I'm being kind of vague in general here, but that's for a purpose. I'm not going to put anyone out there. It was handled at the end of the day. Maybe not as effective, maybe not as efficient as some would like, but it was handled. Speaking to the 3 that were involved, hey, my question was, hey, how did you think that went? Let's break this down a little bit. What do you think? And the first thing that one of the younger guys said was, the way it unfolded, I decided that this was the best approach at the time without seeing this point or this or a third. Okay. And I know I messed up. Well, no. You made a decision. The worst thing, in my opinion, you could have done is not make a decision.
Right.
You made a decision. And I don't think people or people in a leader's charge or subordinates or however you want to term, even employees, I don't think they value the lessons in making a decision.
No, I agree with you. I think it's a tired phrase, but the decision not to act is a decision in and of itself. And sometimes that's the right decision. Sometimes you take a pause to gather more information, but a lot of times it's not the right decision. But more importantly is for the decision maker to recognize that their action or inaction is in fact meaningful. So sure, you want to gather more time, but just recognize what that means. You have less time on the tail end, if that's what the constructs of the situation entail. I don't, like you said, you were talking vaguely, but I can guess that there was probably violence involved, and there was probably well-being involved. So in that minutes, seconds where you're gathering more information, those seconds matter. Right. And while you're doing that, your adversary or your colleagues are all positioning. And so the situation's changing. And as you're gathering more information, the information that you already had is growing stale. So, like I said, sometimes you need more information to act, but sometimes the act of gathering information puts you at a disadvantage.
Right. So that hesitation or that, and we'll talk about this in a second, that fear of decision making comes from somewhere. So whatever climate environment you might be working in, if you are developing or there is a majority or a feeling of fear of making a decision or fear of acting or fear of doing your job as you know it to be.
Sure.
That certainly lends itself to, I know toxic environments are a buzz term these days, and I don't know how I feel about it one way or another, but it's certainly not effective. Whether it at the team level, the division level, organizationally, it just, in my opinion, it's not effective, and it really affects morale. What are your thoughts on the importance of morale?
I thought we were going to talk about risks. Morale. Morale drives how the unit functions, drives how a unit functions. People are willing to ruck a lot further if their morale is high. People are willing to sell more widgets if their morale is high. Come in longer hours, come in on the weekends, whatever the case may be. But also on the other side of that is recognizing that it's not it's an expendable resource. So morale is high. We're going to go for a 25-mile ruck. Well, after the 25-mile ruck is over, you got to replenish that morale. that's part of it. So in that regard, it's it's not a measurable metric, but it's a very important part of how anyone's going to function.
What is your take on the unit organizational climate is a direct reflection of its leadership? And I mean top leadership or administration or whatever titles are held at the top.
I think that's true to an extent. A new leader inherits an organization, and so the morale of that organization probably isn't a reflection of a new leader. And they have either good morale that they're going to do their best not to mess it up, or they have an organization that has no esprit de corps and is kind of infighting and they have to fix it. But given time, where that trajectory is headed is 100% a reflection of that leader, in my opinion.
As if you were to put a percentage on responsibility for the organizational climate between the boots on the ground and the administration, how would you kind of quantify that?
I'm not sure how I'd quantify it. It's it's difficult. The easy answer for a leader is to blame their higher headquarters for everything. So if I'm a company commander and things aren't going well, I can say, hey, Alpha Company, I love you guys. You guys are what I'm all about, and the battalion is screwing us, and I'm doing my best to fight for you. So get behind me and let me fight for you. And that's effective, right? Because these guys are like, wow, this guy's going to bat for us. He's going to do whatever for us. And now the battalion's the bad guys. To hell with the battalion, but our company commander, he's the man, and he's not afraid. That's the easy answer. And sometimes that's probably the right answer. But the key is that you're part of that battalion. So when you're the battalion commander, do you want company commanders doing that? And when you're the company commander, do you want platoon leaders or platoon sergeants doing that?
So let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Sure.
How sustainable is that? It's
not. That's my point. It's not sustainable. And it may make you very popular among the men and women, but it isn't sustainable, and it doesn't achieve the mission, right? Like, it might achieve your mission, but it's not achieving the organization's mission.
No, it does
just the opposite.
And it certainly doesn't promote any kind of cohesiveness within. I mean, whether it be the platoons, the company, or the battalion, for that matter.
So when you have a strong leader that's in that position and can no longer defend their higher headquarters, you've got to really ask yourself what happened, what went wrong,
right?
That this person can no longer obfuscate how messed up their higher headquarters is.
And if that's, and I have on a level, I have some experience with that. If that's the case, we talk about leadership working from the top to bottom and the bottom to top.
Right.
That's when your individual leadership skill set comes into play, or your development of that skill set. And that's a hell of a test, right? Because at the end of the day, you take responsibility because you're in a committed professional relationship with that battalion, that company, or whatever. So however it's going, whether you want to admit it or you don't want to admit it, you shoulder a level of responsibility for the way that battalion, company, even going down to the squad and team level, you shoulder a level of responsibility for how things are going.
Absolutely.
Like across the board. So, and that's true for morale, climate, operationally, hitting your objectives and things like that.
Right.
And I get you made a quick point that that approach of saying, hey, battalion's really screwing you is easy. And that's the climate, unfortunately. That's a popular approach, right? We'll do what's easy for now instead of what's right, and then figure it out later, which just kind of adds to the confusion and the complexities of trying to cover up for doing what's easy.
Sure.
Right? And that comes back to, so now, is there mistrust now? Using your example, once your company finds out that, hey, the old man was, pulling an okey doke on us, and that's not the case.
Right.
Screw this dude.
Right. It's across the board, right? So if you're in that position as the company commander, right? So your company doesn't trust you anymore because they think that you're just going to go for whatever's easy, and you're not going to take any responsibility and shirk blame and point, and then make yourself the focal point. And then your higher headquarters can't trust you either because they know that you're throwing them under the bus. And so you've basically edited yourself out of the equation.
Right. That's we were talking about different lessons from different points of view, different books and things like that. But Jason Redman was one hell of a lesson. If anyone listening, that is one hell of a lesson to learn when you've lost trust of your team, and the road it takes and everything it takes to try to regain some of that trust, if you can.
Right.
Right. If you can. So if we take those points that we just talked about, and a critical incident comes into play, whether it be anything, and name any industry. So a critical incident in the financial field could be, a ridiculous profit margin or quarterly projections or expectations that you may think are unattainable. In that world, in that sector,
that's critical incident.
That's your critical incident.
Sure.
Right? Yeah. In an EMS type thing, it could be, getting response times down, or, whatever, or just responding to a mass casualty event, or
right.
multiple car wreck, and that kind of thing. So when we talk about critical incidents, all those things we have talked about here in the past 40 minutes or so, all kind of, that's when they really count.
Sure.
right? And to maintain the overall mission at all costs, taking care of the team, and then taking care of me.
Right.
Those where those principles are highlighted, right? Those principles can be exposed.
That stuff's easy to do when it's not a critical incident, right? Like that's like to your point, it's important during a critical incident because that's when it's difficult. If everything's going well, then you don't really need a very strong leader. You can get away with just about anything. It's when things aren't going well.
Well, what's that saying? And this is a Hal Moore saying too. Everything is outstanding, or everything is great, except that everything is great.
I don't know that one, but that's fantastic.
So it's like the CPA or the accounting firm that markets impeccable books 100% of the time, 365 days a year, not one single. And that might be true, but it's because the fucking books are cooked. Right?
Right.
The probability of that is next to impossible.
Right.
So if that is, again, that's an easy road that, hey, everything's great. We can rest on our laurels. We can sit back. We can, screw the pooch. We can do whatever. That's very rarely in time, in history, has that ever been effective or ever been held true.
If everything is great, it's temporary, right? Like so everything's great. I don't want to be too cynical. Awesome. Take a second and really appreciate that because it's not going to last.
Right. So, and those critical incidents are certainly the test.
Exactly.
And as much as nobody wants anything bad, nobody, and some people thrive on the pressure, right? Some people do.
Sure.
I had a guy who was cast and labeled as kind of a punk, lazy, this, that, and everything else. You throw him in a position of responsibility, the kid shined.
I thought you say you put him on a podcast and you're
yeah, and he's taken over. And he shined, right? So
sure.
That I don't know if that is, but he needed those critical incidents to kind of showcase the skill set and the development that he had in there. You just need to unpack it. And there's no easy.
Right.
The only way to do it is, this is what you need to do, and you need to show me that you can do it the right way. And he did. He did. That leads me to this question. There is a saying that I personally believe in, and that is, people don't quit organizations. People quit people. What are your thoughts on that?
I would agree with that. I think people probably don't join people, they join organizations, or there's probably a little bit of in between there. But if you joined an organization and you're quitting, unless the organization changed significantly, like you joined a baseball team and now that baseball team sells cars, well, okay, you quit the organization.
Right.
But more realistic than that is, you're quitting a person. You no longer want to be involved with whoever's in charge. And whoever's in charge might not be who's appointed to be in charge, but it's who's ever that center of gravity for leadership. And so you get to a point where that's not what you want to be associated with, or that's not what you want to deal with on a regular basis. So. Right.
Yeah. And I for sure, I can see that, because there's several organizations that, their mission statement is incredibly noble and honorable, and on the surface, it's an honorable, like I said, an honorable profession, great industry. However, the people who are steering that ship, not so much.
Right.
Not so much. And that really highlights that fact that people are going to quit you. They're not going to quit that organizational name or icon, patch, or anything like that. They're going to quit you.
Right.
And a lot of people, especially nowadays, they will sacrifice the people for numbers. And when I talk about this and how some of the stuff we talk about, actually a huge percentage of the stuff we talk about here and we talked about today, can be applied to any industry. So even if it's like the financial industry,
sure,
and you have big projections and quotas and bottom lines and all that other stuff, are you sacrificing your people to meet those deadlines? Are they a disposable resource to you?
Right.
Because once you meet that and they're disposed of, you're right back to ground zero and building up again.
Exactly. So to that point, right? Like, if your people are disposable, then your goal or objective is probably very short term. And if that's the case, then I don't know what business you're in, right? Like, what business is only interested in one quarter's earnings and not for the rest of eternity? I mean, maybe a business that's selling itself. Maybe there are certain circumstances where that's the case, but I think most businesses are interested in longevity.
Well, even in the first responder world, there's been a huge societal push for change and that kind of thing. And there's a lot of areas of that change is needed, for sure. So one of the change when we talk about sacrificing the people for numbers is that the lowering of standards. Because the numbers are down, because the staffing levels are so short, we'll sacrifice the standards, which you can connect the dots to sacrificing the people who are already there.
Right.
For the numbers, because I need to get numbers up for recruiting, for retention. So if I'm bringing in a substandard trained person,
right? Why or how is that acceptable? And I can think of circumstances where it makes sense, and I don't envy whoever has to make that decision and then sell it. But perhaps you have a job where it used to require a certain caliber of person to do this. And because of technological advancements or because of some other external factor, you don't need that caliber of person anymore. Now you just need a drone of some sort. Not a literal drone, but like a person drone of some sort. Imagine giving that speech, though, and being like, yeah, we sure are glad we have all these top dogs. In the future, we really don't need people that are this smart. So we'll be hiring a bunch of dummies.
Well, and yeah, so for the other side of that is, hey, I know you new guys are coming into an industry that you feel is, at this level. But we're going to hire you at this level because we don't feel that you can meet the original standard. It's just too much for you. But we need the numbers. Yeah, come on in. Make yourself at home.
Right.
How does that make the new guy feel? I mean, you're coming into something that, and how does that marry with the overall mission statement?
Right.
Because the standards are born off of that. They have to parallel. So when we lower them, but not the mission statement, right? That isn't cut back. Who feels that? Like how do you reconcile that?
I have the only thing is you can have an applicant pool that's bigger than your available slots, and so you raise standards because you can. So you have 1,000 people applying for 10 jobs, and 900 of those people are qualified. How do you weed out 890 people to pick those 10? Well, you're going to pick the best 10. So you have these top standards. Standards might not have been necessary. You didn't need them to be that good. The other 890 were qualified, but because you had them, you had the benefit of being able to do that. But now you've built an elite team, and 10 years down the road, you've only got 20 people applying for 10 jobs because those other 800 know they're not good enough. So they didn't even bother applying. And 10 years later, you've got 5 people applying for 10 jobs, and you're in a bit of a pickle. And so I can see where that could ebb and flow, and you try to figure out how do we recruit more people. But if the way that you recruit more people is saying, if you want to apply for this job, you have to have 0 felonies. And then you say, all right, if you want to apply for this job, you can't have a felony in the last 5 years. Or you want to apply for this job, you can only have felonies that we think are okay. There's certain ones you can't have, but some of them are fine. Don't worry about it. That's going to develop a certain effect within the organization. And I mean, that goes for any organization. You look at Harvard, they're saying anyone can apply, but we're not even looking at your application if your SAT score is at a certain level or lower. We're not even going to look. It's got to be higher.
Right.
But if, Harvard's probably a bad example because I don't think Harvard is ever going to say that they didn't get enough people to apply. But I'm sure they are challenged with this constantly because I'm sure that there are more people with perfect SAT scores applying to Harvard every year than there are people getting accepted. And they accept people that don't have perfect scores. So somewhere along the lines, they figured out a calculus to allow people in that don't have the perfect score without necessarily lowering their standard, or with lowering their standard in a way that they have decided is acceptable. But where that affects the student body or the organization or how these things work together.
Well, I would, and again, to kind of play devil's advocate, I would say that in certain industries, certain genres, that might be acceptable. I wouldn't be going to the doctor who had to meet or didn't have to meet the same standards as the guy who graduated 3 years ahead of him.
Right.
Is this, in certain industries, there are standards there for a reason because the stakes are higher.
Absolutely. But to that point, so yeah, when I go to the doctor's office, if the doctor says, yeah, I went to whatever school, I went to this state school and I got in because I was a football player and I didn't really go to class that much, but I passed and, I know which side of the scalpel is sharp. I'm not going to feel really good about that at all.
Right.
That's pretty bad. But on the other side of that, I've gone to many a doctor of my own free will and volition, not just the Army doctors. And I've never once asked where they went to school. Like I couldn't tell you where any doctor that I've ever gone to, I couldn't tell you where they went to school. And so to a certain extent, I'm willing to, even there where the standards are important, I don't know if the guy who cut me open went to a state school, went to Harvard, went wherever. So I don't know. I think, if you sat down with the same doctor, and instead of telling you, hey, I just barely squeezed by and no one was really looking at me because I was friendly and that's how I passed, the same guy saying, like, I worked my ass off. These standards were outrageous. The hardest thing I've ever done was medical school. My practice since then has been a million times easier. I don't understand why they made me do these surgeries drunk and blindfolded to prove that I'd be able to do it later sober with no blindfold. You'd be like, oh, wow, those standards sound absurd. Why did you have to do that? That doesn't even make sense. And I think both ends of those spectrums happen all the time where you're saying, well, why is the standard something that's not quite realistic for what you're going to be doing? But it's organizationally dependent. So within your organization, if the standards are where they're supposed to be and then they're lowered, that's a massive problem.
Right.
Massive problem.
Agreed.
If they were too high in the first place, that's the problem, and you're looking at the correction.
True. I definitely agree. I just think when you talk about the stakes, what's on the line,
Sure.
if it gets to be human life, military, because we've heard all the stories about the lowering of the standards, especially anywhere from basic AIT to NCO academies to whatever it may be.
Sure.
Even the warrant application. Is that effective as far as being sustainable long term? Is that effective to the mission? Is that to I guess the military in general? Is that, I think that's the basic question.
It's not, but sometimes there may not be another solution. So if your options are to try to think of a mission where we know exactly how many people it takes, and I don't have if your options are to man an 8-man raft with 8 men, but those 8 men are about your 70 percentile, or your option is to do it yourself, I'm going to take the 70 percentile guys versus going alone.
All right. So say you have a squad of 5 rafts, 5 8-man teams. 3 of those 8-man teams have met the standard, and 2 of the rafts are at 70%. Who are you choosing for the mission?
Oh, right.
Right?
Hands down, you're going with
even if it's a whole squad mission, a whole squad 5 mission, I would rather do that mission with 3 100% standard qualified teams than 5.
Depends on the mission, but I don't disagree with you. If my options are a better team or not better teams, I'm going with the better team every time. But unfortunately, sometimes the constraints that reality places on you is that you don't have 100% men to draw from.
Right.
You've got a plethora of different situations that you have to pick from. And that's where, Harvard's the bad example. And that was the example I used earlier. That's a terrible example because Harvard has never once been hurting for people to apply. They've got more applications than they know what to do with.
Right.
If you and I opened our own university tomorrow, we would be the better example, right? Because I don't know who would come apply for the Thompson and Juster universities, whatever. Like we'd be hurting for people, so you'd have to. We wouldn't be able to say like, all right, if you're good enough for Harvard, you're good enough for us. Everybody else can pound sand.
Right.
So you're forced to make adjustments.
Yeah, and that, I mean, that when you have that, especially the folks that have met the original standard that coincides with the mission statement, when
Right.
when that influx of substandard people or
Right.
folks come in, how do you promote resiliency within the team squad, the division? How do you promote resiliency to the folks who have met or exceeded the standards? Like, how do you inject that into the team to kind of keep the climate?
That's a tough question. I almost want to say that you'd be forced to reevaluate the message in general. But I would say, I mean, the focus remains on the mission. In that, as a team member, my concern with my left and my right is their ability to support the mission, and from there, if they're substandard and that they can't support the mission, that's a problem. If I think that I'm better than them, but they can still support the mission, well, I probably need to check my arrogance. Or if I think they're better than me, but I can still support the mission, well, that's probably the best situation for me, because now I have something to strive towards. But as a team member, as the leader, I think you tell your team members, focus on the mission. If your buddy to your left or your right can't quite cut it, help them cut it. Help them get to that point. That's not your job, but it is.
Right, for the betterment of the objectives and or mission, right?
Right.
And again, to kind of relate this to different industries and the principles being universal, that's the same with finance, banking, even a cook in a restaurant and that kind of thing. If the sous chef can't do this and the line cook can't do, and
Right.
people to your left and your right, in order for you to, and there's kind of like a learning curve there too, where it's substandard, and now I have to take the role of trainer or remediator or mentor, coach, whatever term you want to use. That's an added task or responsibilities that if you have believability in the overall mission and or organization,
Sure.
you're going to take that on with effective leadership. Without that, if somebody's projecting an I don't give a fuck attitude at the top, or an I don't care attitude at the top, the chances of you building that resiliency, from the bottom up, right? Because organizations, they fail at the top, but grow and develop from the bottom.
Absolutely.
If you don't recognize that.
Absolutely.
And that brings us to like the human element. When we talk about the overall mission, the team, and me, if you can lead yourself daily, set the example, take responsibility, try to apply those 11 principles to your day to day as an individual, you can apply those. Once that cup's full, you can apply those lessons and experiences to other people. And
Sure.
if I'm a huge believer in, if you don't know or understand or willing to develop an understanding of human nature and the way humans develop and the way they build skill sets, you're going to have a tough time. Whether an assumed leadership role or an appointed one, whether you're an influential teammate or an appointed squad leader or frontline leader, all the way up to the top dog.
Right.
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 So I know we've talked about Abraham Maslow's
Hierarchy.
hierarchy of human needs, right? And you take a look at a basic any type of army unit, an army company, right?
Sure.
The company commander is the brains, right? He's the books, he's the operational, task and purpose and that kind of thing, and the first sergeant's the beans and the bullets. So if the first sergeant is taking care of the basic human needs, right? The safety and security, the food, water, shelter, and all those things, and the boots on the ground know that that's there at some point. Your creature comforts obviously won't be there. They know from there that you can move on to the second tier of building relationships.
Sure.
And we all know that we don't have to, and nor is it really reality to expect to develop, long-lasting bonded friendships and brotherhoods with every single person you've met and worked with. That's just
Right.
It's not going to happen.
Right.
What is possible is to develop that very fundamental professional relationship across the board. I used to say this all the time to the officer candidates, that you may not be, having Sunday dinners and ski vacations on the weekends with the people you work with, and that's perfectly fine. But if you're going to develop anything, develop a fundamental, basic professional relationship, all based on the overall mission or objective or task or whatever you have to do.
Right. Right.
From there. And I think that from a leadership point of view, if you don't understand that, if something isn't going right, or we're not meeting whatever, or being effective in hitting the objectives and hitting our hacks one way or another, those are some things we need to take a look at. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, across the board, I think in a leadership role, the relationships are the most important part. That's really your bread and butter. I know you're saying you're not expecting them to have the ski vacations together, right?
Yeah.
But you probably should have at least somebody that you're working with that you are having that with. If you're skiing in general, right? Like, I don't go on ski vacations with anybody, let alone people I work with, because I don't ski. But like, even our friendship is, if it had its foundation in serving together, right? And then that friendship transcends service, but it only transcends service because we're not serving together anymore. But if we were still serving together, we'd still be having the same friendship that would have continued to develop across all those years. And you see that within the organization we're coming from. A lot of those guys have those friendships and those bonds that transcend that unit. And I think that is a massively important part. Like you said, the baseline needs to be a professional relationship. And if we look at our organization, there are folks that aren't part of that brotherhood, if you will. But you still have that professional relationship. And I look at my time in command, and there were people within the organization that I had that professional relationship with. And now that I've moved on, maybe our careers will intersect again. Maybe they won't. And we have not kept in touch. And that's okay. There's no hard feelings whatsoever. But there were others that we really did develop that bond. And we've kept in touch. Some of them I talk to almost every day. Some of them, weekly. And I think that relationship is very important because it's genuine. It isn't that, I'm your friend right now because I'm your boss and I'm just trying to kind of get to know you and go through the motions and like, what do you like to do? What are your kids' names? And no, it's real. I really do care, and we are going to maintain this, brothers in arms mentality,
right,
till the end.
Now, I don't know how that would relate, because I don't have any relatability in other industries. So to try to keep in this like universal principles, I feel like any other industry that whole thing is, because those relationships that we've developed, and I'm with you. There's people I don't talk to anymore, and it's not. There's no rhyme or reason to it. There's no
Right.
ill will. It is what it is. There's some that are ill will and I have a visceral
Sure.
hatred for, and they can go do stuff. But
Sure. We have an overlapping list with them too.
yeah, we absolutely do. But that I wouldn't have developed that relationship, and I circle back to Maslow, if I wasn't safe with them, if I wasn't secure with them,
Right.
if we weren't able to sustain ourselves at the basic level.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
On that level. And that has to happen. That has to happen. So if I'm in banking and there's a project coming up,
Right.
I need to, and as well as you, we both have to have a level of safety and security that you're going to hold up whatever you need to. I'll hold up whatever I need to get this task, project, whatever banking people do to get, you know what I mean? To get it done. And then from there, you know, hey, you good? Yeah, we're good. All right, good. See? All right. Hey, we made this happen. And now we're developing that next level of relationship building.
Banks are the perfect example, because you said you don't have a lot of experience in other industries. I don't either. My experience in other industries is incredibly limited. It was basically limited to me deciding I didn't like other industries and getting back into government service. And I have no intent of ever doing anything else ever again. But you brought up banks. I don't know. I have no idea what banks do. No, the slightest idea. So like some banking project, it's kind of a, I don't know, non sequitur here, but just the idea of a bank project. No clue. I don't know how banks employ people, what the people at the banks do. It's kind of a fascinating concept.
So I'm just, as far as like relatability to what we're talking about, to different industries.
Right. And there's got to be a relatability. It's just not one that I have a first-hand experience with.
Right.
Like I know that people meet each other at work. I know a lot of relationships start at work.
Right.
You know, a lot of married couples met at work.
True.
A lot of men date their secretaries. Like it's a thing. Not supporting it. I'm just saying it's a thing that happens. So those relationships outside of the military or military-like organizations exist as well. And that workplace environment, I would imagine, and unfortunately it's just speculation, but I would imagine that those workplace environments are, in that regard, rather similar. Now, the question of those bottom tier hierarchy of needs coming into play is probably a lot less likely at a bank, I would think. But I don't know.
I guess if I was to go into that with whatever knowledge I have now, I guess that would be my play. You know, that would be my approach to just having somebody know that they're secure in me handling whatever, you know, responsibilities that I needed to handle.
Right.
And that would be my, I guess, one of my first objectives. And then, you know, continue to build a professional relationship from there. I would think, and I'm with you. I don't know. Maybe I'm not looking at it, you know, with all the available information in different industries. But I guess I would hedge my bets on that approach.
I would agree.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting an interesting thought of how to apply these principles
in other industries. Absolutely. I mean, I think the principles of leadership are going to extrapolate no matter where you are or what you're doing.
Right.
And some of the extrapolations might become metaphors, and some of those metaphors might become pretty stretched. But realistically, I mean, there's, like you said, there's a reason the Army invests in these principles. And there's a reason people study military leadership who aren't military leaders. And the reverse is true, right? We can study leadership within business, and that would extrapolate to the military as well. And I think we talked about it earlier, the leadership strategies of organizations like Walmart, and kind of the fascinating strategy level. And I'm sure if we were to dive into CEOs and the way CEOs run their businesses, or even team leads and the way team leads run their businesses, we would be able to learn quite a bit, or relate to it at least. I'm sure there's absolutely fascinating, groundbreaking ways that people do things.
I agree. Now, whether I find them, morally just is a totally different subject.
Sure.
And I found that to have those, and this is kind of a very recent revelation to me, and I'm starting to wrap my head around it completely, is that to have those expectations of a moral compass for other people is a fool's errand.
Sure.
I think that it comes back to leading self daily. I can only take care of my moral compass every day and bring what I feel is right to the table when it comes to work and professionalism and that kind of thing. And hopefully set an example, and understand that, you're probably not going to be the world beater that you envisioned. And that's not to try to stunt anyone's growth or dreams or aspirations or anything like that. But realistically, be a self beater. You know what I mean? If you're improving 1% every day, that's 365% at the end of the year.
Right.
And you could develop yourself into the best asset that team, squad, division, organization has.
Sure.
And as far as the example, you can set the example. You can't force the example on anybody.
No, you cannot.
In closing, what the biggest take or the biggest lesson that you have taken from a command position to an operational team member position, the biggest thing that has struck you, or anything that you have found to be a challenge, or just something that you found to be incredibly interesting?
The concept that a leader can lead something that they don't know how to do is something that I've understood for a while. But to have it reiterated again has been, because that was my focus when I was in command most recently, was to become proficient at the task that my organization was charged with completing. And I think that was personally an excellent goal, because I really wanted to do that. And that's what I'm doing now, and I really enjoy it. But as a commander, that was probably not the best use of my time, and did not serve my organization as well as it could have, had I focused my efforts instead on becoming the best commander. So when you knew me you still know me. When you knew me in uniform, I was platoon leader for a heavy equipment platoon, right? And I had a very simple goal of being able to move the equipment that we had within the platoon. I wanted to be able to be that kind of an asset on the ground. I didn't ever expect to be good at operating a bulldozer, but I did think that I should be able to take the bulldozer from one place to another safely. Same with, the excavator or the scraper. So that was my expectation of myself. My expectation of the soldiers was that they could operate the bulldozer well. That was their job. And so kind of learning that I don't need to be the best bulldozer operator. And had I spent all the time in the world becoming the best bulldozer operator, I would have been foregoing becoming a good platoon leader. If that makes sense.
Sure. You just described being technically and tactically proficient, one of the 11 principles.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And it's easy to get caught up in that. So leaving command, I really did focus when I was in command on the technical proficiency, and leaving command and being able to execute that technical proficiency has been a blessing for me. And like I said, I'm really enjoying it. I'm finding job fulfillment in that regard. But then it makes you question what's the next leadership role, and do you want to do it? Do you want to go into another leadership role where you're going to leave that technical proficiency? So you're not going to be operating the bulldozer anymore. If you love operating bulldozers, maybe leadership role isn't the role for you.
Do you think that lessons learned and the skill set that you were able to develop in that initial command role will serve you better if you choose the next command?
So, I mean, truth in advertising or transparency, I have no interest in being in a command role ever again. Now, when I left the role as a platoon leader, I said that I never want to be a company commander. So things change, opportunities change. Sometimes opportunity presents itself that just makes sense. But even now, sitting here, hindsight being 2020, part of what was so attractive about that command position was the ability to do the technical training. As the commander, the expectation was that I would do the technical training. And I would be lying to you if I didn't say that was part of the reason I took that position, was because I wanted that technical training. Now, the Army in its infinite wisdom set things up that way. If I were put in charge of something else, I would set things up differently. There's no reason a commander should be learning how to operate a bulldozer. That doesn't make any sense at all.
Well, I think I agree to a point. I do believe that a commander should have a baseline as far as
Absolutely.
because just the decision-making process without the baseline of how operationally things are done,
right?
I think that puts them behind the eight ball and puts them at a terrible disadvantage.
Absolutely. I mean, we went to senior gunner school together.
We did,
and learned the ins and outs of Mark 19, 50 cal, 240, all the way down. But understanding in intricate, intimate detail how to fix headspace and timing on a 50 cal, I would argue, is good use for a platoon leader's time. As a platoon leader, I don't know if a brigade commander needs to have the level of detail that we achieve there. Now, the brigade commander needs to understand machine gun theory, well, depending on the brigade, I guess. But any brigade commander, we're in the fucking Army. The
right.
Brigade commander should understand machine gun theory.
Absolutely.
Regardless of the brigade, and understand how to employ machine guns. But I don't know if they need to understand headspace and timing.
Agreed. If they have the baseline of its capabilities and, like you said, how to employ it and
right.
where and situational and operational necessity is huge.
It is. Now that being said, if the brigade commander has the opportunity to go to the senior gunner school and finds a new passion. It's like, man, all I want to do is be on a gun. I don't know what he does next. You don't,
Yeah.
because the brigade commander finishes his time as brigade commander and goes into some sort of staff position, and his next role is itching for division command. He's never going to be on that gun again, and I think that's one of the biggest issues, at least in my career. But I think a lot of officers struggle with this: is they get a chance to go do the deed or go train to do the deed, and once they have, they don't want to do anything else.
Right.
I don't have a good solution for that, other than maybe get out of command, get out of leadership.
Yeah. I mean, if you find or determine that you're no longer an asset to that overall mission,
Right.
in keeping in those priorities, and I know it sounds terribly black and white, but that's the complexities of leadership, right? We can have those three priorities. The variables all revolve around the human element.
Yes.
That's what makes leadership such a complex subject. However, the simplistic principles can be applied in mitigating and navigating through those issues.
Yes.
It's just whether we want to do what's easy or we want to do what's right. And that's where I think the principles are great, but I think the core values, the Army values, the creeds, the oaths, and those things that tie into it and play such an important role in maintaining and applying those principles moving forward.
Sure.
So, but yeah, I personally wouldn't trade it in the lessons learned for anything in the world. I think it's incredibly important, and I do feel that the principles and the approach can be applied when people are developing their own leadership process and their own skill set in any industry. So
Absolutely.
I think
Absolutely.
I think it's a hell of a place to start, especially if you're in a frontline leadership or just in an assumed role as an influential teammate. I think those are some great places to start. The 11 Principles of Leadership, Abraham Maslow, maybe some Stoicism and that kind of stuff to build some accountability, some self-accountability, some self-discipline and that kind of thing.
The influential team member, I know we're time-wise, that'd be a great conversation for another episode. The influential team member is kind of the person who didn't decide to be a leader. They just are, right? And like, they didn't sign up and they didn't get put in a leadership position. They're just there. And the responsibilities that come with that are different, and they need to be viewed from a different perspective because they didn't ask for them. If you're a platoon leader, you asked to be the platoon leader. If you're the most well-liked team member and everyone looks to you for direction, you didn't ask for that, and you're not getting compensated. Not that matters, but like you're not getting the benefits of that. You're just the guy, the charismatic guy with that gravity.
Right. So I'll leave this, and it'll be a little bit of a hanger here. So if Colin, we talked about it earlier, Colin Powell said that once your people stop bringing you problems, you've ceased to lead. You've ceased to be a leader. So then where do the people go? Where do they go from there?
Right.
They go to the influential team members, the person who has their shit wired tight, the tactically proficient, the ones who apply those principles. They take responsibility. They communicate well. They do all those things. Those are the people that we go to. I agree. That's definitely a subject for another episode. So, in closing, I want to thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I appreciate everyone for listening, and stand by for the next episode. I want to thank everyone for listening to this week's episode of Fido Talk with Dave Thompson. If you would, please subscribe and review. It helps a lot. Share the word with your friends and family. Have them check it out and provide some feedback. We'd love to hear it. Check us out at barebonesleadership.com for the latest blog and different perspectives on everything leadership. Follow us on the gram and on our newly updated Facebook page. Share your comments, your thoughts, your views. Any and all feedback is always welcome. And don't forget, keep kicking those fucking doors in, and as always, Fido. I appreciate you guys listening. Take care, and see you next time.